Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. I didn't do the intro this time. I'm gonna give it a rest for a couple of videos just to get us, you know. I don't want us to get too tired or something. And maybe I'll have some other music uh, here in the near future as intro. Just kind of keep it fresh. Okay, so Bone wanted me to react to it's called the story behind the white guy in the historic photo. So the Young Turks. Now I don't know what we're fixing to get into, y'all, but apparently it's something to do with, looks like basketball, maybe. I mean, I don't know, but this is what I do. It's almost 8 minutes long, so hey, I just do what people request. So let's get into it right now.
Now, you remember back in 1968, there was that powerful moment in the Olympics when Tommy Smith and John Carlos won gold and bronze in the 200-meter race in Mexico City. And they put on black gloves and raised their hands in protest for what was happening in the country. In that year, of course, Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated, and they wanted to speak out for all the people who were beaten down. They wanted to speak out for equality, and they also wanted to speak out for all those who lived in poverty. They actually did not have their shoes on. You can't see it in that picture, but that's why they took their shoes off in protest of that as well. And there were some badges there. But what you might not have noticed is the person no one ever noticed in that picture, Peter Norman. Peter Norman's an Australian, and he came in second that year in the Olympics. A huge upset. They didn't think he was going to finish in the top three at all, and he ran an amazing race. In fact, he was so fast that day that his record in the 200 meter still stands as the Australian record to this day. He ran it back in 1968. Isn't that amazing? So what did Norman do? I mean, he didn't really do anything. He didn't have the black glove on. He didn't seem to support them, right? Wrong. So this is the fascinating story of Peter Norman. It turns out he's the one that gave them the gloves in the first place. And they said, well, we only have one pair. He's like, why don't both of you wear them? Just wear one apiece. Okay, so they're like, well, do you want to participate in this? He's like, absolutely. What can I do? Well, there was this patch that they used to have back then called the Olympic Project for Human Rights. And what that stood for is being on the side for equality no matter where you are. And he wore that badge. He didn't have that badge, but an Olympic rower from the U.S. team, when he found out that a white Australian was going to participate in this protest, he couldn't believe it. And he's like, that's fantastic. Now, why couldn't he believe it? And he gave him, the American rower gave Norman the badge to wear that night, and he did wear it along with Carlos and Smith. Why is it so amazing? Well, you might not know this or remember it, but back then Australia had apartheid, like South Africa did. And in a lot of ways, that apartheid was quite vicious. It had heavy restrictions on non-white immigration, discriminatory laws against Aboriginal people in Australia, and even forced adoptions of native children to white families. And basically, by wearing that badge and being on that podium, they thought that he was collaborating with Carlos and Smith. And Carlos and Smith describe it this way. When they talked to Norman about it, Carlos said, I expected to see fear in Norman's eyes, but instead we saw love. Now, in Australia, there were consequences. 4 years later, at the 1972 Summer Olympics that took place in Munich, Germany, Norman wasn't part of the Australian sprinters team, despite having run qualifying times for the 200 meters 13 times and the 100 meters 5 times. So, just to be clear on that, he made it onto the team fair and square 13 different times for the 200 and 5 times for the 100. They said, yeah, that's true, but you stood with those black guys, so you're not allowed on the team. Films for Action continues. Back in the change-resisting, whitewashed Australia, he was treated like an outsider, his family outcasted, and work impossible to find. For a time, he worked as a gym teacher, continuing to struggle against inequalities as a trade unionist and occasionally working in a butcher shop. John Carlos continued to say, if we were getting beat up, and they were, there was a lot of consequences for Carlos and Smith when they came back. They were thrown out of our Olympic committee and our teams. They were stripped of their medals. But Carlos says, if we were getting beat up, Peter was facing an entire country and suffering alone.
Yeah, let me pause right there, man. So I'm not going to make a lot of comments on this because I don't want this channel to turn into a political channel. You know, there's people that are on one side and there's people on another side. That being said, I'm for human rights, and there's good and bad in every race. You know, when our ancestors did certain things or were brought up a certain way, it's just the way it was, and I don't condone it, and I don't agree with it, and I just can't imagine people of color. You know, my wife, I've told y'all, she's 100% Mexican. You know, I see the people will talk to me, you know, some of these older folks will talk to me like she's not even there. You know, like I'm above her somehow or another. And man, she'll cut your throat in a minute, you know. But I see it. You know, I've never dealt with racism or being prejudiced against me because I'm white. But I've seen her be discriminated against because she is a woman of color. Have a daughter that's half Hispanic and half white. My granddaughter Bella, she's half Hispanic and half white. So, man, I just I don't know if it'll ever be perfect. You know, it certainly won't be perfect in my lifetime. But man, I just hate for anybody to have to go through that. My granddaughter Lucy, now get this, y'all. You know, my granddaughter Lucy, who just turned 7 months old. Yeah, just turned 7 months old. She's 1/4 white, 1/4 Hispanic, 1/4 black, 1/4 Korean. Now, to me, that's going to make her super strong. Her immune system is going to be outrageously good. Everything about it is going to be strong. But I know in the future she's going to face racism of some type. I don't know from what race, but she'll face it, and it's going to kill me. So, you know, I don't want this, like I said, I don't want this to be political, but man, you know, it's all race. All races are racist. Black people are racist against white. Whites are racist against black. Yada, yada, yada. It goes on and on and on and on. It's not just the white people, y'all. It's not. It's not just the black people. It's not just the Hispanic people. It's not just the Asian folks. It's not the Arabs. It's not just these different races. It's everybody. Everybody's racist. And if they tell you they're not, then they're not being entirely truthful. Okay? So I didn't know the story, Bone. So I appreciate it. You know, I'm curious to see how this ends up. I'm gonna let this thing play through, y'all.
Now, even as we celebrate Carlos and Smith here in this country, for example, San Jose University has a statue up of that moment. And let's take a look at that statue for a second. And this is not unusual. I don't mean to pick on them, but Norman's completely left out of the statue. He's not even there. Nobody ever talks about him, right? Well, turns out that Norman could have saved himself and Here's a further explanation of that. Remember, his life is ruined. They won't let him go back into the Olympics. They won't let him do anything related to the Olympics. Has to work in a butcher shop. There's one way out. For years, Norman had only one chance to save himself. He was invited to condemn his co-athletes, John Carlos and Tommy Smith's gesture, in exchange for a pardon from the system that ostracized him. A pardon that would have allowed him to find a stable job through the Australian Olympic Committee and be part of the organization of the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games. Norman never gave in and never condemned the choice of the two Americans. That's the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games. Even though he was one of their literally greatest athletes in Australian history, they did not let him march, let alone giving him a job. They didn't let him march in the 2000 Sydney Olympics under the banner of Australia. That was well after apartheid's gone. All that old system is beaten down. They're past it, but they still held a grudge. How dare you not denounce those two black guys? In 2006, Norman died. Unfortunately, no better off financially in his life. And when he was being buried, his two old friends, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, went to his funeral and carried his casket. Finally, in the year 2012, the Australian Parliament passed a law saying apologies to Peter Norman for the wrong done by Australia in failing to send him to the 1972 Munich Olympics, despite repeatedly qualifying, and belatedly recognized the powerful role that Peter Norman played in furthering racial equality. Look, what everybody did there was brave, heroic. And we know about John Carlos and Tommy Smith, and they are rightfully celebrated now. But let's not forget Peter Norman, who was one of the quiet heroes. And that happens in all of these movements. They're the guys we celebrate and the guys we know for very, very, very good reasons. But they're the quiet heroes who sometimes suffer alone. And in some ways, just as heroic, at least, because they're not celebrated. He was never celebrated in his life, and he died being ostracized from his own country. And he took all that on for one simple reason, because he wanted to do the right thing. And when they asked him, hey, are you mad at Carlos and Smith for taking away your moment? You broke this record for your own country. You ran an amazing race, and all the news was about them. And he answered, I couldn't have been prouder to be part of that moment. Unfortunately, he took that to his grave. There are great heroes in the world, some we know about and some we don't.
That's true. That's absolutely true, y'all. Yeah, hats off to Peter Norman. There's not enough of these wonderful men for the rest of us to look up to. So, yeah, man. I was a kid during all this. I was 8 years old when that would have happened in '68. 8 or 9, whatever. But, my job in the police department, as a police officer for 20 plus years, I've seen dirt bags of all races. There's not a single race out there that doesn't raise a dirt bag. Unfortunately, for people in my position, I only come in contact with bad men or bad women. I don't, of all races. In other words, I don't get to see the good in people 99% of the time. I'm only seeing the bad in people, and I'm trying to take them out of society so they don't hurt other people. But I don't see race, being, man, I'd hate to say that. I mean, I'd hate to I'd hate to think that I used race in my way of thinking, in my way of trying to come to a conclusion of a whodunit, for instance. I can't tell you for 100% that I didn't, you know, I mean, I'm human. I hope not. And I don't have any memory if I did, but to tell you the truth, man, you know, I served with some wonderful, I mean, so in the Marine Corps, I served with the best men this country had to offer. And they were all different races, you know, so when I got to be a police officer, now I'm dealing with the worst men that this country has to offer. But I had that firm foundation that was instilled in me in the Marine Corps, that it's not a race thing, because I worked and I served along with the best, regardless of color. Not everybody gets that opportunity. Not everybody gets that opportunity to live and sweat, bleed with people of different races and different cultures, and raised differently in different parts of the country, and in the city or in the country or in the, you know, the bayous of Louisiana. I got to do all of it and learn about everybody, and they accepted me for who I was, and vice versa. But, you know, like I said, man, I don't see any difference in the race hate that was in the 60s. I don't see any difference between then and now. I still think it's the same. And I think it's regardless of what color you are. There you go. I said it, man. White people were to blame. Black people, y'all are to blame. Hispanic people, y'all are to blame. Everybody holds equal blame here. I'll accept my blame, but I'm not going to accept somebody else's blame. Okay. That was a great story. I didn't know that story, Bone. And man, y'all just keep bringing them to me, and I'm glad you did. Thank y'all. So I'm gonna cut this one loose here. What are we at? We are at 17 minutes, almost 18 minutes. Okay, let me get into the outro. Thanks everybody. Subscribe, hit the like button. Until I see you again, I'll catch you down the road, and I'm gonna go to the outro. So bye, y'all.